I pulled into the driveway, my hands trembling slightly, because today was supposed to be the day everything I worked for finally paid off. I had spent months, sleepless nights, and countless sacrifices to pay off the last installment on my parents' loan. Every extra shift, every missed dinner, every exhausted evening alone, it was all for this moment. I imagined their relief, their gratitude, maybe even a warm hug to say, "Thank you, you saved us." I unlocked the car door and stepped onto the porch, breathing in the familiar scent of home. But something felt off. The house was too quiet. No laughter, no sounds of the TV, not even the usual shuffle of feet from my parents. I reached for the front door and froze. The doorknob wouldn't turn. I jiggled it. Nothing. Confused, I checked the other doors. Locked. Every single one. My heart started racing. I spotted a piece of paper taped to the glass. Hands shaking, I peeled it off and read the words scrawled in my parents' handwriting. "We're gone. Don't try to follow us. The house is ours now." I stood there, staring at the note, my chest tightening, disbelief crashing over me like a wave. Every memory of nights spent working 3 jobs, of skipping meals so I could make a payment on time, of consoling them when the stress of debt kept them awake. All of it now felt like a cruel joke. How could they do this? How could the very people I sacrificed everything for, the people I loved and trusted, betray me overnight? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Did they ever appreciate anything I did? Or had they been planning this while I exhausted myself on their behalf? The house that had once been a symbol of family, warmth, and my mother's dreams now felt like a prison I had built for myself. The loan was gone, but the safety and trust one had worked so hard to preserve was shattered in a single night. My stomach churned as I realized I was alone, blindsided by the very people I had tried to protect. I sank to the steps, gripping the note, and for the first time in months, I let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. Betrayal isn't just a word. It's a living, breathing thing that can destroy your sense of home and your belief in people you once held sacred. I knew 2 things immediately. I had to find out why, and I had to decide what to do next. There were 2 shocks waiting for me that I had no idea about yet, and hidden in all of this was one ironclad truth that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you tried to save, you understand this moment, the mixture of disbelief, pain, and anger. If that's you, like this video and tell me where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to share isn't just a story of lost money or property. It's about loyalty, family, and the moments that test the limits of what we are willing to give and what people are willing to take without a second thought. Tonight, you're going to see how far betrayal can go, how quickly trust can vanish, and how one person can rise from the ruins of what they thought they were protecting. I grew up in this house, the same one that now stood at the center of my life's biggest test. Its walls were lined with memories, family dinners, birthday parties, the small victories and even bigger losses that shaped who I was. After my mother passed, the weight of responsibility fell squarely on my shoulders. My father, kind but often careless with money, relied on me more than I realized. The loan had been hanging over their heads for years. It wasn't just a piece of paper with numbers. It was the difference between losing the home they had worked so hard to keep and keeping the legacy of my mother alive. I had promised her, when she was too weak to speak in full sentences, that I would protect her dream. Her voice, frail but determined, whispered in my memory, "Keep our home, no matter what." I threw myself into the effort without question. Every extra shift, every skipped weekend, every late night spent crunching numbers and making payments, it was for them. I believed that the sacrifice would keep our family intact. I believed that my father, at least, would appreciate the sleepless nights and the exhaustion etched into my bones. But even as I labored, subtle hints started to appear. My father would occasionally complain about the money, muttering under his breath about how much I was spending or how long this would take. I brushed it off, telling myself it was grief, stress, or just the natural weariness of someone his age. Sometimes he would leave receipts lying around, or mention small purchases he'd made without thinking of how they would affect our payments. I noticed moments with my extended family too. Cousins and siblings would make jokes about how much I must love money to keep the loan current, or suggest that they could manage if I stopped helping. I laughed along with them, pretending their teasing didn't sting, pretending that their lack of appreciation was insignificant. Every time the phone rang with a reminder from the bank, every time an email arrived threatening foreclosure, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. The house wasn't just a building to me. It was my mother's memory, my childhood, the safe place that had shaped who I was. Losing it would mean losing her again, in a way that was permanent and crushing. I started to see the cracks more clearly as the months went by. My father, who I had always considered responsible, began slipping into habits that worried me. Late-night calls I didn't understand, small purchases I hadn't authorized, and a sight and casualness with the payments that made my stomach twist. I confronted him once, gently, trying not to sound accusatory. He smiled and said, "It's all under control. Don't worry." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Even with these subtle warning signs, I pressed on. I picked up extra shifts at work, sometimes working 3 jobs just to keep the payments current. My friends rarely saw me. My social life had evaporated. Weekends were spent balancing spreadsheets, talking to loan officers, or running errands to make sure every penny went where it needed to go. Yet, even in the midst of this, I found moments of pride. Every time I sent in a payment, I felt a small surge of victory. Every month the bank confirmed the balance was paid down, I whispered a quiet thanks to my mother, imagining her smiling, proud that I was keeping my promise. But underneath the pride was fear. Fear that despite all my sacrifices, it wouldn't be enough. Fear that my father might make a mistake, or that my extended family might see this as an opportunity to take advantage. And then there were the subtle signs I began to notice more clearly, the little jokes that felt too pointed, the way my father sometimes looked at me with something I couldn't identify, and the quiet way he would shrug off responsibility. I asked myself often, have I taken on too much? Should I have stepped back and let them manage their own lives? But every time I considered it, the memory of my mother's weak, pleading voice returned, reminding me of the promise I had made. I could not, would not, let her dream die. And so, day after day, I carried the weight of their debt. I carried it because I loved them. I carried it because I had promised. I carried it because the thought of losing the house, losing her memory, losing the legacy she had entrusted to me, was unbearable. Looking back now, I realized the warning signs were always there, subtle but present. They whispered in glances, in offhand comments, in moments of carelessness. I ignored them because I wanted to believe in my family, because I wanted to trust that love was enough to keep us together. But sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, even the closest bonds can crack under the weight of expectation and opportunity. Have you ever felt completely responsible for keeping your family afloat? Have you ever felt that every decision, every sleepless night, every sacrifice was entirely yours, with no guarantee of gratitude or loyalty in return? That was my life. Every day, the house stood as a reminder of both my mother's dream and the heavy burden I had taken on. I thought I was saving my family. I thought I was keeping the legacy alive. But I had no idea that by morning, everything I fought for could be gone, and the people I trusted most could turn their backs on me entirely. After my mother passed, I knew the loan hanging over our family home couldn't wait. I couldn't rely on my father alone. He tried, but his habits and forgetfulness made it clear that if I didn't step in fully, foreclosure would become a reality. I took on extra work immediately, stacking shifts like bricks, each one heavier than the last, each one carrying the weight of my mother's dream. Some days I worked from dawn to late at night. I juggled my main job, picked up freelance assignments, and even took temporary contracts that offered no stability, just money I could funnel directly to the bank. Weekends, which I used to reserve for rest or hobbies, became my calculation days, sitting at the kitchen table, bank statements open, spreadsheets running, making sure every cent was accounted for. Sleep became a stranger. I'd collapse into bed at 3 a.m., only to wake up a few hours later to answer emails or make urgent payments. My friends stopped calling. I stopped returning messages. I had no time for social life, no time for small pleasures, no time for myself. Every moment I spent outside the work was a moment I feared the house might slip further from our grasp. Every milestone in the repayment process felt monumental. I celebrated silently when I sent in the first big installment. I cried quietly when a particularly large payment left me drained but closer to the goal. I kept a calendar, marking every milestone with a tiny check mark, reminding myself of progress and sacrifice. Each check mark represented sleepless nights, cold dinners, missed birthdays, and postponed dreams. Yet, the emotional burden was more than just fatigue. It was the constant tension of hoping my father wouldn't make a careless mistake, that he wouldn't forget to deposit a check or sign a form. I found myself holding my breath whenever the bank confirmed a payment, waiting for some unexpected news that would erase all my effort. I began carrying anxiety like a permanent shadow, aware that one slip could undo months of hard work. And then there was the gratitude or lack of it. My father would thank me casually, sometimes with a shrug or muttered thanks, I guess. Occasionally, he would mention how much he appreciated me working so hard, but it never had the weight I expected or needed. Family visits were strained. Small comments from siblings suggested they assumed the money was endless, that my sacrifices were automatic. It stung more than I expected. I had poured myself into keeping our home, and yet acknowledgement seemed always half-hearted, fleeting, or absent entirely. Even in moments of exhaustion, I reminded myself why I did it. I remembered my mother's frail voice, the promise I made to keep her home intact. I imagined her walking through the garden, tending the flowers she loved, feeling proud that her legacy was safe. That image kept me moving when my body screamed for rest, when my spirit threatened to crack under the pressure. Sometimes, I caught glimpses of resentment in my own thoughts. Is this fair? I would ask myself quietly, am I being used? But then I'd shake it off, telling myself love isn't always fair. Sacrifice isn't always recognized. Protecting the people we love sometimes comes at the highest personal cost. I convinced myself that my efforts were necessary, noble, and unavoidable. I started noticing patterns in how my parents behaved. They would request extra assistance, an advance on an upcoming payment, help with errands, or even casual financial favors. I never hesitated. I never refused. I told myself that these were small prices to pay to keep the house from slipping away. Every sacrifice was a brick in the foundation of my mother's dream, every sleepless night a thread in the safety net for our family. And yet, in those moments of giving, I couldn't fully escape a growing awareness that gratitude alone might not be enough to sustain relationships. Casual comments, fleeting thanks, and a lack of true acknowledgement whispered a quiet doubt in my mind. Still, I ignored it. I told myself that love required endurance, that sacrifice required faith, that loyalty required putting the family first, even at my own expense. Would I give everything I had to save someone else's future? I did, every single day. I gave up time, sleep, comfort, and peace of mind. I gave up social events, personal projects, and the quiet freedom to live my own life without constant financial worry. Every sacrifice was deliberate, conscious, and made with full knowledge of the consequences. I convinced myself it was all worth it, because the alternative, the house lost, my mother's memory tarnished, was unthinkable. Looking back, I can see the toll it took on me. My body ached, my spirit frayed, my emotional resilience stretched to its limit. But I kept going. I had to. Every payment, every effort, every sleepless night was a promise kept to someone who could no longer speak for herself. And I held on to that promise, even when the acknowledgement and appreciation I craved seemed to disappear in the face of exhaustion and routine. Every night, I'd sit at the kitchen table, bank statements spread before me, and whisper a silent prayer to my mother. "I'm doing it," I'd say softly. "I'm keeping your dream alive. I won't let it fall. I promise." And with that, I'd return to work, to payments, to the grind, hoping that one day the effort would culminate in the relief and gratitude I imagined, and that the house, the home, and the legacy my mother left behind would be safe. Even as I kept sending payments, working extra hours, and sacrificing my own well-being, small things began to nag at the back of my mind. My parents, the very people I was striving to save, started acting just a little different. Not outright, not glaringly, but enough to make a knot of unease grow inside me. It started with phone calls I would catch out of the corner of my eye, my father stepping outside to whisper into his phone. Conversations cut short when I entered the room. At first, I chalked it up to old habits, private matters, or just the stress of life. But then I noticed the receipts. Small purchases, not the kind you expect from someone struggling to keep their house. Expensive groceries, gift cards, even electronics. Nothing outrageous alone, but when paired with months of struggling, it made my stomach twist. I spotted online accounts I didn't know about. Bank notifications popped up, or the occasional forgot password request, and suddenly I realized my parents had ways of moving money I couldn't see. I caught myself rationalizing each time. Maybe they were trying to manage their own finances. Maybe they were protecting me from small worries. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. There were whispers from extended family too. "Oh, you're always so generous," my cousin said during a brief visit. "It's nice your parents have someone to rely on." I smiled, nodded, and said nothing. The comment stung more than I expected. Generosity should never feel like a responsibility, yet somehow I carried it as if it were my only duty. At family dinners, I started noticing little inconsistencies. My father would mention trips that seemed unnecessary given our financial strain. My mother, when she lived, would have reminded him to be careful. Now, with her gone, I saw behaviors that hinted at independence I wasn't supposed to see, or maybe secrecy I didn't want to acknowledge. I tried to push it aside. My mind clung to the idea that family unity mattered more than suspicion. I told myself that noticing these things would be petty, that doubt would erode trust, that hope was stronger than fear. Every small red flag was rationalized, tucked away into a mental folder labeled nothing to worry about. I even caught myself avoiding questions. When my father said he needed to make another payment or check on an account, I didn't ask for details. When I glimpsed unusual spending, I told myself it wasn't my business. Ignorance felt safer. I needed to preserve the narrative. We were a family, and we were united in keeping our home. But beneath it all, the unease grew. The small things whispered doubts I didn't want to voice aloud. Phone calls that ended abruptly. Receipts that didn't add up. Friends' fleeting comments. A glance at a bank statement that seemed off. Each one alone felt minor, ignorable. Together, they formed a pattern I could no longer entirely dismiss. I thought about confronting them, about asking pointed questions, but I feared the fallout. Would they see my worry as mistrust? Would they react with anger or denial? The thought of creating conflict in a family I was already carrying on my back felt unbearable. So I ignored the signs, hoping they would resolve themselves. Hoping, in the quiet corners of my mind, that I was overreacting. It wasn't fear alone that held me back. I told myself this was love. This was loyalty. This was the cost of preserving a home that held memories, that held my mother's spirit, that held the promise I had made. And yet, the cracks were there, small but persistent, like hairline fractures in a glass I kept polishing every day. Every day, I checked the calendar, made the payments, and prayed silently. "Just a little longer," I whispered. "Soon, it will all be over. Soon, everything will be safe." But with each whispered prayer, a tiny voice in the back of my mind warned me not to be so trusting. That maybe, just maybe, the very people I sacrificed for might not see it the same way I did. I started noticing other subtle behaviors too. The way they avoided eye contact when discussing the mortgage. The way they seemed to celebrate small purchases quietly, almost secretly. I caught fleeting glimpses of a ledger or bank notice, hidden when I entered the room. And yet, I pressed on, rationalizing each moment. They are family. They are under stress. It's nothing I need to worry about. But the pattern was there, unmistakable if I allowed myself to see it. Small cracks forming where there should have been gratitude. Tiny signs of entitlement in place of acknowledgement. Little shadows where love and respect should have shone. I chose, stubbornly, to hope over fear. I chose to believe that these were just minor lapses, and that once the loan was fully paid, gratitude and unity would shine. I remind myself of the bigger picture. The house, my mother's dream. The sacrifices I made, the nights I stayed awake, the extra jobs I worked, the weekends I gave up. It was all for something bigger than petty doubts or tiny red flags. And yet, the questions lingered in the corners of my mind. Were these small signs truly innocent, or were they a warning of the storm to come? The day I made the final payment felt like the heaviest weight lifting off my shoulders. I sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling slightly, staring at the confirmation email, then the bank receipt, and finally at the empty envelope I had sent. Every late night, every skipped meal, every second job I had taken, all of it led to this moment. The debt was cleared. The house was ours. I could almost feel my mother smiling down at me, proud that I had kept my promise. I imagined telling my parents, celebrating with them, or at least seeing the relief in their eyes. I pictured my father putting a hand on my shoulder, saying, "You did it. We're free now." I imagined my mother's favorite flowers in the window, her legacy secure, memories protected. I felt proud, exhausted, and finally, a little at peace. After sending the last payment, I called my parents to share the news. The conversation was short, polite, and surprisingly subdued. I didn't push for excitement. I just wanted acknowledgement, just a word that said they recognized my effort. But they seemed distant, preoccupied, distracted. I brushed it off. After all, life was busy. They were probably relieved in their own way. I spent the evening tidying up the house, straightening the living room, making sure everything looked just right. It was a symbolic act, I told myself, a way to honor my mother's memory and to finally enjoy the fruits of my labor. I prepared a small dinner for myself, quietly toasting to the completion of the long, grueling journey. Relief mingled with pride, and for a moment, I allowed myself to exhale fully. As night fell, I checked all the locks, just like I always did, and went to bed satisfied. The house was safe. The mortgage was gone. The debt erased. Everything was finally in order. I drifted into sleep with that sense of quiet victory, unaware that the next morning would shatter everything I had worked for. I awoke to silence, not the peaceful, early morning silence I had grown accustomed to over the years, but an eerie, unsettling quiet. Something felt off immediately. The smell of fresh air coming through the windows felt wrong. The rooms that had been filled with memories, with echoes of laughter and my mother's presence, seemed hollow. My heart began to pound as I moved toward the living room. The sight that greeted me stopped me cold. The house was stripped bare, furniture gone, personal belongings missing, boxes stacked neatly in the driveway. Even my mother's heirlooms, which I had been most careful to preserve, were gone. And then, there it was, a note, placed carefully on the kitchen counter, the ink sharp against the paper. We did what we had to do. Don't bother trying to stop us. Shock and nausea hit me simultaneously. I sank to the floor, staring at the note, my mind refusing to process the betrayal. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every ounce of effort had been erased overnight. The family I had fought to protect had turned against me. The house, the legacy, the memories, all gone in a single, cruel stroke. I couldn't breathe at first. My hands shook as I read the note again, looking for a clue, some hidden meaning, something that could explain away this sudden, heartless act. There was none. It was deliberate, calculated, cold. I felt rage rise like a fire in my chest, mixed with a crushing sorrow that left me trembling on the floor. My parents, people I had trusted with my life, had made a choice. They had chosen to erase everything I had done, everything I had given, as if it meant nothing. I replayed every moment leading up to this day, wondering if I had missed signs, if the subtle odd behaviors, the secretive glances, the hidden transactions I had noticed in Chapter 3 had been warnings all along. But I had ignored them, choosing hope over fear, choosing trust over suspicion. And now that choice has cost me everything. I couldn't stop thinking about the irony. All those nights I lay awake, worried about their future, and now I lay awake, staring at the note, wondering how they could have done this to me. The betrayal was profound, sharper than I could have imagined. It was as if the very people I had sacrificed everything for had decided to erase me from my own life. At that moment, I realized that my fight wasn't over. My mother's legacy had been compromised, yes, but it wasn't gone. I couldn't undo the damage they had done, but I could decide how I would respond. I could choose despair, or I could choose action. The pain was raw, but clarity began to form through it. I had been blind, trusting too much, but now I would see everything. I would uncover the truth. I would take steps to reclaim not just my mother's legacy, but my dignity. I sat there for hours, digesting the enormity of the situation, the cold calculation of my family, the harsh reality that loyalty had been one-sided. And yet, beneath the shock and grief, a small, steady ember of resolve began to glow. They had underestimated me. They had assumed my sacrifices made me weak, but I was far from broken. I would act. I would plan. I would survive. And someday, justice would follow. That night, I went to bed knowing the house was safe, or at least I thought it was. By morning, everything changed, and nothing would ever feel the same. Family betrayal cuts the deepest. Subscribe if you know loyalty should never be one-sided. I woke to the usual morning light filtering through the curtains, but something felt off immediately. The house, which had always welcomed me with the faint smell of my mother's favorite candles and the quiet hum of life, felt alien. I stretched, yawned, and reached for the door handle to step outside for my morning walk, but it wouldn't aim. My heart sank. The door was locked. I tried again, jiggling it, twisting it, as panic rose. Something was wrong. The sound of my own frantic breathing filled the hallway as I raced to the other doors. Every single one. Locked. My hands trembled. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. On the kitchen counter, a folded piece of paper caught my attention. My fingers shook as I unfolded it, dread crawling up my spine. The handwriting was unmistakably theirs, neat and deliberate, but the words cut through me like ice. We did what we had to do. We can't live under your rules anymore. Don't try to fight this. We're gone. I sank to the floor, gripping the edge of the counter. My legs felt weak. My chest ached. Every sacrifice I had made to pay off their debt, every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every extra shift, it had meant nothing to them. They had erased everything I had fought for, and all I had left was this note. I thought about the locks, the cold steel separating me from the home I had saved. They had changed the locks, making a physical barrier to match the emotional one. Rage and heartbreak collided inside me. My throat burned, tears stung my eyes, and my fists clenched so tight I could feel the tension in my arms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to run straight to their doors and demand answers, but even that was impossible. I walked slowly through the empty rooms, touching the surfaces my mother had loved, now stripped of the familiar presence of those I trusted. I could almost feel her disappointment, the echo of her voice saying, "You did what you could, but people can be cruel." I realized I had been blinded by love and loyalty, expecting gratitude where only entitlement now stood. Anger simmered inside me. How could they do this? How could the people I had supported for years decide overnight that my effort, my blood, my time, was worthless? The betrayal was raw, immediate, and heavy. I paced the living room, each step echoing like a drumbeat of disbelief. My body shook, my mind racing through every late-night conversation, every phone call begging for patience, every smile I had forced while covering for them. And yet, amidst the storm of emotion, a spark of clarity emerged. They had made their choice, but I still had mine. I could let this destroy me, break me down until I was nothing but a shadow of who I was. Or I could rise, take control, and make sure their betrayal didn't erase my worth. I thought of the memories tied to this house, my mother's laughter in the kitchen, the way sunlight spilled across the living room where I had grown up, the garden I had promised her I would protect. None of it was gone. The house might be empty to them now, but the legacy, the lessons, and the love I had carried could never be stolen. I sat on the floor, note in hand, the locks now a symbol of both loss and resolve. Rage still burned, but beneath it, a quiet determination began to take hold. I would uncover their plan. I would reclaim what had been taken. I would survive this betrayal, and I would not let it define me. By the time the sun reached its peak, I had begun to map out my next steps. Calls to banks, reviews of documents, small inquiries about legal options. Each action was a tiny thread I could pull to start untangling the web they had woven. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't defeated. Not yet. And in that quiet, heavy moment, I made a promise to myself. Whatever it took, I would make sure they understood that loyalty taken for granted has consequences. The house was more than walls and furniture. It was the symbol of my endurance, my sacrifice, and my mother's dream. They might have locked me out physically, but I would never be locked out of my own resolve. If you woke up and everything you saved was stolen or rejected, would you scream, cry, or plan revenge? The morning light was harsh against my eyes, but I couldn't rest. The note and the changed locks had shattered the fragile calm I had been holding onto. I needed answers. I couldn't accept that everything I had sacrificed for, every sleepless night, every paycheck, every ounce of energy, had been erased overnight without reason. I started with the obvious, the papers I had been keeping, the receipts for the last few months' payments, anything that could trace the path of the money I had used to save the house. I spread them all across the kitchen table, my hands shaking, my chest tight. Every bank transfer, every cleared check, every online payment told the story of my dedication, but I needed to know theirs. I logged into accounts I had long trusted them with, scrolling through transactions, looking for anything unusual. At first, it was small things, transfers that didn't match bills, withdrawals that seemed unnecessary. Then I saw it, payments to accounts I didn't recognize, a series of transfers from my parents' name to a name I had never heard before. Someone had planned this. Someone had plotted it. The realization cut deeper than the locked doors ever could. I rifled through drawers and files, checking hidden documents and correspondence I had never thought to examine. Contracts, receipts, emails, each one built a picture of premeditation. They hadn't simply acted out of spontaneity or whim. This had been planned. Every transaction had a purpose. Every phone call I had ignored now seemed like a small step in the path they had been walking behind my back. I paused, running my hands through my hair, trying to breathe through the rising panic and anger. The betrayal was not accidental. It was deliberate. The sense of being blindsided by my own family burned hotter than any financial worry ever could. I realized that I had been so focused on saving the house, on keeping the home intact, that I had ignored the growing shadow in their behavior. Then came the calls, neighbors, friends, even distant relatives. Pieces of information trickled in, whispered stories of sudden sales, mysterious meetings, secret consultations. Each one confirmed what I had feared. This was not an act of gratitude gone wrong. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to strip me of control, of power, and of the legacy my mother had entrusted to me. I found myself shaking with rage. How could the people I had trusted, the people I had poured my life into, do this to me? I thought about every night I had worked late shifts, every sacrifice I had made, every skipped meal, every time I put my own health and happiness aside for them. And now it seemed all of it had been used against me, as fuel for their betrayal. But beneath the shock and the sorrow, a spark of clarity emerged. If they had planned this, then there must be a pattern, a way to untangle the web they had created. I began organizing evidence, copies of transactions, bank statements, documents, messages. I noted each suspicious move, each inconsistency, every lie they had tried to cover behind smiles and casual words. As I worked, I realized something else. They had underestimated me. They thought my exhaustion and loyalty would keep me from seeing the truth. They believed that my love for family would blind me to their deception. But I was seeing clearly now. The betrayal was deep, yes, but so was my resolve. I would not let this slide. I would not allow their manipulation to define me or erase my mother's legacy. Hours passed. My kitchen table became a battlefield of papers, evidence, and my own thoughts. I took notes, made calls, and began tracing the paper trail back to its source. Every discovery added fuel to my anger, but also to my focus. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. I paused for a moment, taking a deep breath and looking out the window at the house that had once been my sanctuary. I thought about my mother, her dreams, her faith in me. I felt her presence, and it strengthened me. The betrayal of my parents might have robbed me of comfort and trust, but it had not taken my courage. It had not taken my intelligence. It had not taken my determination. By evening, I had a clear picture. I knew who had planned this, what they had done, and, most importantly, that I had the means to expose it. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't defeated, and I wasn't going to stay silent. I looked at the stack of documents and felt a mix of exhaustion and resolve. This was more than money or property. This was about trust, family, and the principle that betrayal should never go unchallenged. I would act, but I would act carefully. One misstep and they could vanish, taking everything with them. One misstep and my efforts to reclaim what was rightfully mine could crumble. As night fell, I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever it took, I would uncover the truth fully. I would face them with the evidence. I would reclaim my dignity, and I would ensure that the betrayal, the disrespect, and the manipulation would not go unpunished. I could feel the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me, but I refused to collapse under it. I had given everything to save my parents' home, and now it had been stolen from me. That sense of injustice was too heavy to ignore. I knew I had to act, but I had to be deliberate. Anger alone wouldn't serve me. I needed strategy, clarity, and patience. The first step was gathering all the evidence I had collected in the previous days. Bank statements, transaction records, emails, receipts, even the note left on the door. Every piece told a story. I copied everything, organized it chronologically, and made sure nothing could be denied. This was my arsenal. Every detail mattered. Every small clue could expose the depth of the betrayal. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and explained the situation. She listened quietly at first, but when I laid out the paper trail, I saw a spark of recognition in her eyes. She nodded and said that the evidence was strong, that I had a legitimate claim, and that we could move to protect what was rightfully mine. Relief surged through me, but I also felt a simmering determination. Legal action was only part of the plan. I needed to reclaim my dignity in every way possible. Next, I reached out to family members I could trust. I told a few of them what had happened, showing them the evidence. Their reactions were mixed: shock, disbelief, some guilt. I could see the ripple effect. Once the truth was laid bare, people began to question the actions of those who had betrayed me. Their lies and excuses no longer held weight in the light of facts. Then came the confrontations. I didn't rush them. I planned carefully, choosing moments when I could remain calm and collected. When I finally faced my parents, I saw the fleeting flicker of shame in their eyes. Some tried to argue, to justify their actions with excuses about entitlement, desperation, or misunderstanding. I listened quietly, letting them speak while I mentally prepared my responses. I didn't yell or cry. I let the evidence speak for itself. Some of them crumbled under the pressure. They admitted parts of the plan, faltered when they realized that I had anticipated each lie, each cover-up. Others lashed out, angry that their betrayal had been uncovered. They tried to twist the narrative, but I remained steady, presenting the facts and refusing to be manipulated. With each interaction, I could feel the control I had lost slowly returning to me. I also reached out to neighbors and acquaintances who had been witnesses to small, seemingly innocent interactions. Their accounts corroborated my findings. The community began to understand the gravity of what had happened. What was once a private betrayal was now visible, undeniable. The sense of empowerment was gradual but unmistakable. I realized that justice was not just about reclaiming what was taken. It was about reclaiming my voice, my agency, and my sense of self. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't naive. And I would no longer allow my love and trust to be exploited. There were moments when the fire of anger threatened to consume me. I imagined confronting them with harsher words, demanding apologies I knew they might never give. But I reminded myself that the real justice was in the truth being known, in the actions I took to protect my own dignity. Every legal filing, every recorded conversation, every exposed lie was a victory. By the end of the week, the balance of power had shifted. I was no longer the person who had been taken for granted. I had reclaimed my place in the family narrative, even if it meant distancing myself from those who had betrayed me. I had shown that loyalty and love should not be abused, and that betrayal comes with consequences. In quiet moments, I allowed myself to feel a mixture of relief, anger, and pride. I had been forced into this battle, but I had emerged stronger, smarter, and more self-assured. The house, though once stolen from me, had become a symbol of my resilience. The note, the locks, the absence, they all reminded me of what I had endured and how I had risen above it. The days after the confrontations were surreal. The house that had once been a symbol of family and security was now a memory tinged with betrayal. Some of the family tried to make amends, but the fractures ran too deep. Apologies felt hollow, and trust, once broken, could not be easily rebuilt. I realized that while I had regained my dignity and exposed the truth, the home itself might never truly be mine again. Yet, in the emptiness, I began to see what truly mattered. The walls, the furniture, the heirlooms, they were just objects. What mattered was the strength I had discovered in myself, the lessons I had learned about resilience, and the boundaries I was no longer afraid to enforce. My mother's legacy was not just in the house she left behind. It lived in my courage, my perseverance, and the love I carried forward for her memory. I spent hours reflecting on the sacrifices I had made and the betrayal I had endured. The pain was real, sharp, and sometimes overwhelming. But with each passing day, I could feel the weight lifting slightly. I began focusing on rebuilding my life on my own terms. Small victories became markers of progress, a new savings account, a quiet dinner enjoyed without stress, a project completed that was entirely mine. Each step reminded me that my value was not tied to the recognition or gratitude of others. Some family members faced consequences in their own ways. Their social standing suffered, and their relationships within the community became strained. The truth had a way of reaching beyond the walls of my home, and while I did not seek vengeance, I allowed the natural outcomes of their choices to unfold. Justice, in this case, was not only about reclaiming what was lost, it was also about witnessing accountability take shape. I also learned the importance of choosing carefully who I allowed into my life moving forward. Trust is precious, and I had given it freely to those who did not deserve it. That lesson, though painful, was invaluable. I began cultivating relationships with people who demonstrated loyalty, respect, and integrity. These connections became the foundation upon which I started to rebuild my sense of family and security. The house, once filled with the laughter and memories of my mother, now existed in my mind and in stories I carried. I could recall every corner, every smell, every detail of the rooms I had fought so hard to protect. Those memories, unlike physical objects, could not be stolen. They were mine to keep, and they reminded me that the essence of legacy is not in material possessions but in love, values, and the strength to endure. Each morning, I allowed myself a moment of gratitude for surviving the ordeal. I had been tested in ways I never imagined, and I had emerged stronger. My mother's spirit seemed to live in my persistence, guiding me to make choices that honored her memory and reinforced my sense of self-worth. The betrayal, though scarring, became a catalyst for personal growth. I began documenting my experiences, not out of bitterness, but to remind myself and others that survival is an act of courage. Writing became a therapy, a way to process the whirlwind of emotions and to affirm that I was reclaiming my life, one decision at a time. I could see now that material loss, while painful, could never erase the legacy of resilience and love that had been instilled in me. In quiet moments, I reflected on the choices I faced. Would I continue trying to recover the house and all it represented, or would I walk away and build something entirely new, grounded in the lessons learned and my hard-won independence? The answer was clear. I would create a life that could never be threatened by the greed or entitlement of others. My mother's legacy lived not in a building but in the strength I carried forward. Would you fight to rebuild what was stolen or walk away to build something new? Could you find peace knowing that survival and self-respect matter more than objects or misguided loyalty? I realized that what remains is not always what we hope to keep. Sometimes, what remains is our own courage, clarity, and the ability to live without regret. That, more than any house or inheritance, is the true legacy worth preserving. I still remember the night I made the final payment on my parents' loan. The relief had been overwhelming. I thought the weight had been lifted from my shoulders, that the home my parents had fought to protect was finally secure. I went to bed exhausted but proud, believing that my sacrifices had safeguarded both their legacy and my family's stability. By morning, everything had changed. The doors were locked. The house, once filled with warmth and memories, felt alien and empty. A note left behind made it clear that my parents had chosen to erase all I had done. Shock and disbelief froze me in place. How could the people I had given everything to betray me so completely? Rage, sorrow, and heartbreak washed over me in waves, leaving me unsure if I could even think straight. In those first hours, I realized that betrayal can cut deeper than any financial strain or physical loss. The house, the furniture, the heirlooms, they were all symbols of trust, and that trust had been shattered. I grieved not only the material loss but also the relationships I thought were unbreakable. The people I had sacrificed for had chosen their own convenience over the love and dedication I had poured into keeping them safe. Even in the midst of devastation, a small spark within me refused to die. I had fought to protect a legacy not just for others but for myself, and I knew I could not allow betrayal to define me. My first steps were simple. I documented everything, organized evidence, and began to plan how I could reclaim dignity, if not the house itself. I reminded myself that survival is not measured solely by what we possess, but by the strength and clarity we maintain when everything familiar is stripped away. As I processed the betrayal, I found that my sense of self-worth did not come from the gratitude of others. It came from the knowledge that I had acted with integrity, that I had given my best efforts even when no one else acknowledged them. That realization became my anchor. I understood that I could survive the loss of possessions, the erasure of recognition, and even the betrayal of those I loved most, because my strength had always been mine to keep. The journey forward was not simple. There were legal documents to review, conversations to have, and boundaries to enforce. Some family members were defensive or tried to rationalize their actions, while others refused to communicate entirely. I had to accept that I could not change the past. My energy would be better spent building a life that could not be undone by others' choices, rather than clinging to what had been taken. Through this process, I discovered the true meaning of legacy. It was never in the walls of the house or the furniture inside. It lived in resilience, in the courage to act for what is right, and in the ability to rebuild from nothing. Every small victory, whether it was saving for my own future, completing a personal goal, or simply reclaiming peace of mind, became a reaffirmation of my autonomy and self-respect. I also learned that forgiveness is a choice, not an obligation. Could I forgive my parents for changing the locks, for taking what I had worked so hard to protect? Perhaps one day, but I would not wait for that day to live fully. Forgetting the lessons learned would be impossible, and living without boundaries would be foolish. My focus shifted to myself, my growth, and the life I could now create free from the constraints of misplaced loyalty. In the quiet moments, I would reflect on both climaxes, the relief of the last loan payment and the shock of waking to locked doors. Those experiences reminded me of the fragility of trust and the importance of standing strong when betrayal strikes. They also reminded me that even in the darkest hours, I possessed a resilience that no one could take from me. My mother's legacy was safe, not in the house, but in the person I had become. Every act of perseverance, every night spent working, every dollar sacrificed, had created a foundation I could not lose. It was a reminder that family may fail, but strength, endurance, and self-worth are permanent if we nurture them. Hauntingly, I continue to ask myself, if your own parents erased your sacrifices overnight, would you forgive or forget? That question lingers because the answer is not simple. Forgiveness may come, but forgetting the betrayal may never be possible. I have chosen to focus on survival, clarity, and building a life that cannot be undone. Subscribe now for more stories of betrayal, survival, and justice. And tell me, could you ever forgive a family that changed the locks on everything you saved?